So how did the elections on Tuesday night go for the left? There were a bunch of states that had primary elections. Well, the concise answer about how it went is this. It was a mixed bag. It was so-so. There's some really good news and there's some really shitty news. So let's go to The Intercept here and see what they report. Progressives beat back the establishment in New Mexico, where a Native American woman defeated an Albuquerque prosecutor with backing from No Labels, a coalition of ultra-wealthy donors who work to tip Democratic primaries to the right. In California, it was the bizarre Orange County races that got much of the coverage, but the House race there that offered the cleanest choice between the two ideological poles was the one in the 45th. Min, a former Senator Chuck Schumer staffer, Center for American Progress fellow, and assistant professor at Porter's School, UC Irvine, had the backing of the State Party and the New Democrats. Those are the centrist corporatists, a Wall Street-friendly bloc that supplied 27 of the 33 House Democratic votes in favor of the recent bank deregulation bill. Porter was the only House candidate endorsed by Warren, Elizabeth Warren, her former teacher and co-author. Min, meanwhile, was hesitant to embrace Medicare for All and ran a slashing race attacking Porter's credentials. Porter ran on battling big banks, expanding Social Security, reversing the Trump tax cuts, and establishing Medicare for All. And she won. The New Democrats suffered another defeat in a race that pitted the two camps of the party against each other in San Diego's 50th district. Amar Campa-Najjar, he's a Justice Democrat, who ran as a progressive with the backing of Justice Democrats PCCC and DFA, beat Josh Butner, who endorsed by the New Democrats and backed by the Wall Street-friendly Representative Joe Crowley. The chair of the House Democratic Caucus, who is facing his own challenge from the left back home in the Bronx and Queens from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Campa-Najjar faces incumbent Representative Duncan Hunter in the general election, an uphill climb as Republicans won more than 60% of the votes in the primary. But a grand jury is hearing testimony related to an investigation of Hunter for misuse of campaign funds, and if an indictment comes down between now and November, the race becomes that much more in play. In New Mexico's 1st District, Deb Haaland, Antoinette Cedillo-Lopez, and prosecutor Damon Martinez squared off. Cedillo-Lopez, a civil rights attorney, had the backing of some national progressive groups, such as Justice Democrats and the Working Families Party, as well as Latino Victory, which spent heavily on her. Martinez, meanwhile, got a big boost in spending from the super PAC tied to No Labels. Again, the centrist corporatists. But Haaland, who is poised to become the first Native American member of Congress and had the support of the Congressional Black Caucus PAC and environmental group 350.org, beat both of them. In northern New Mexico, the Working Families Party's top recruit for the night, Susan Herrera, pulled off a landslide upset in a state legislative race that the local press called the end of a political era. The WFP, Working Families Party, spent more than $60,000 on the race, and she knocked off 25-year incumbent Representative Debbie Rodella in an area that is solidly Democratic but thought to be socially conservative. Quote, "I'm kind of amazed that we did it," Herrera said of her grassroots campaign in her victory speech. Rodella's close ally, Representative Carl Trujillo, was also knocked out by a progressive challenger, as was Representative Belquin Bill Gomez. The Working Family Party's Rob Duffery called the string of wins seismic, bringing about a major sea change in the balance of power in the New Mexico state legislature. The establishment was also dealt a blow in San Francisco, where business-friendly candidate London Breed came out on top in the first round of voting, but the city uses a ranked choice voting system in which voters rank candidates on their ballot instead of voting for just one. If no one gets a majority of the votes in the first round, next preference votes are counted until a candidate gets most of the votes. The left had split its votes between Mark Leno and Jane Kim, giving Breed a lead with 36% to Leno's 26% and Kim's 21.5% in the first tally. Without ranked choice voting, that would have been the end of it, and Breed would have been declared the victor. But with ranked choice votes, the bulk of Kim's support shifted to Leno, putting him on top. So that is a clear example of the populist left winning out as a result of a ranked choice voting system. And, if we implement a ranked choice voting system everywhere, my guess is that's going to happen a lot. So normally the corporatists would have slid by because there were two progressives in the race and they split the vote between the two of them. But because of ranked choice voting, one of the progressives ended up winning. That's an awesome story, and it shows how, good of an idea ranked choice voting is. And I think that should be implemented absolutely everywhere. But what you saw there's a bunch of victories for the left. Now, typically, what you're looking for is, in all these races, here's how you know a good person won. If the person who won is endorsed by the PCCC, Working Families Party, Democratic Socialists, Our Revolution, of course, Justice Democrats. So there's a bunch of groups that it's a good indicator of, hey, that's a good politician because they're endorsed by that group. Now, in some instances, like Cedillo Lopez, she was a Justice Democrat and she lost, which sucks, but it was another lefty who ended up winning. So that's not the worst thing in the world, because as long as somebody who's on the left ends up getting through and beats the no labels-backed candidate, the new labels-backed candidate, those are all, that's all centrist, corporatist Democrats, then it's good, and we're happy. As long as the left beats the establishment, we're happy. So let me give you some more specifics. As far as the Justice Democrats go, Amar Campanajjar, he was a Justice Democrat. I already explained how he won his race in California's 50th district. That's great. Audrey Denny won in California's 1st district. That's wonderful. Ro Khanna was up for re-election, easily was re-elected. That's, of course, wonderful. Ro Khanna is, I think, the very first Justice Democrat. He's, basically at this point, he's the Bernie Sanders of Congress. He's the ideas guy on the populist left. Pete D'Alessandro and Courtney Rowe, these are two Justice Democrats. They lost in Iowa. John Heenan is another Justice Democrat. He lost in Montana. Peter Jacob lost in New Jersey. So there were plenty of losses, but also plenty of wins. Now, as far as Our Revolution goes, Jennifer Marecki won in Montana for the state Senate. J.D. Scholten won in Iowa for U.S. Congress. And, of course, the biggest one that hurt, and I saved the bad news for the end here, Allison Hartson lost. And Kevin De Leon ended up advancing into the general. So everybody knew going into this election, Dianne Feinstein was going to come out on top. She was polling way above everybody else, and she has the power of incumbency. So she won, obviously, but her numbers weren't even that impressive. Kevin De Leon got second. He is challenging Feinstein from her left, but I think there are problems with De Leon in the sense that it appears like him even running right now is a little bit of... He's playing politics. He doesn't even necessarily want to win. He's not running an aggressive campaign. He just wants to get his name out there more. He's the head of the Democrats in the Senate in California, and he could just be trying to get his name out there more, and so that he sets up for the next time he runs for an office. Everybody knows, like, oh, there he is right there. It's De Leon, and we're familiar with his name, and he thinks that might help him in the long run. He is running to Feinstein's left, but if Feinstein represents the establishment, De Leon's like the diet establishment. The real populist candidate was Allison Hartson, but of course, between the two choices now of Feinstein or De Leon, I would support De Leon because Feinstein is just really bad. But De Leon got 440,000 votes. Allison got 77,000 votes. So then, of course, this leads to the question, why did she lose? And, there's a lot of there are many ways to break down that question. And, one of the things is, of course, and this is not to, point fingers elsewhere and scapegoat. Because we spoke about these things before the race even happened. But one of the problems was the media just simply wouldn't cover her. I can't tell you how many articles I read where they would speak about the U.S. Senate race in California, and they would only bring up Allison Hartson. They would only bring up Dianne Feinstein and Kevin De Leon, and they would leave out Allison Hartson. And, any individual establishment, mainstream press outlet, it's not a big deal if they leave her out. But the problem is it was a cumulative effect where every establishment outlet would never mention her. So many people didn't know that she was running or who she was or what she stood for. Whenever people were confronted with who she was and what she stood for, people loved her. So there's a problem with signal boosting. We can't get everything out there. And obviously, she had the backing of new media, myself, and the Young Turks, and Jimmy Dore, and many others. But, I guess we're not big enough. We're not famous enough. We don't have as wide a reach on our own as we do compared to the cumulative effect of every single mainstream media outlet. So that's one reason why she lost, the non-existent coverage from the media. But, the real reason is this. Take a look. This is the amount of money they raised. So Dianne Feinstein raised $14 million, spent $8 million. Okay, and then you go down the list there. Rocky De La Fuente is a Republican and got destroyed, but he raised a decent amount of money. Kevin De Leon raised $1 million, spent about half of that. Those are solid fundraising numbers. Now, here's the really interesting part, okay? So Pat Harris is another Democrat who ran. Pat Harris was expected to do pretty well in terms of should have been up there around what De Leon was at and was expected to do better than Allison Hartson. But look at what happened. Allison Hartson, so Pat Harris raised $608,000. Allison Hartson raised $360,000. So Pat Harris almost raised double what Allison Hartson raised. Guess what? Allison Hartson defeated Pat Harris. Allison Hartson finished ahead of Pat Harris. In fact, Allison Hartson, it was Feinstein and Kevin De Leon who now advanced to the general election, and then it was a bunch of Republicans, and then it was Allison Hartson. So she was the second Democrat. And Pat Harris, even with raising about double what Allison Hartson raised, got fewer votes. So what that means is Allison Hartson actually overperformed in terms of her fundraising. But that's not saying much because she still was, nowhere near actually advancing. But that means that she had value as a candidate. It is true that she had people power, but she just didn't have the money. She didn't have the financial backing to get her name out there more to be able to advance. And listen, man, this is why Allison Hartson has been working with Wolfpack and leading Wolfpack and trying to get this amendment to get money out of politics, because she understands firsthand what it's like and how it's not theoretical. When Dianne Feinstein raises $14 million and Allison Hartson only raises $360,000, man, that's a near impossible hill to climb when you start from that far back. And listen, this is what happened with Paula Jean Swearengin, too. I mean, we covered that story in detail. I forget the exact numbers now, but she got about 30% of the vote or so against Joe Manchin. But when you look at the amount of money she raised, it was nothing compared to Joe Manchin. I mean, Joe Manchin was just way ahead of her. So you got to understand the dynamics of this stuff, guys. If they raise more money, they can run more ads, they can get their name out there more. They could, they can afford to do whatever, push polling, mailers, you name it. And it also buys them credibility in the press, where the press covers them as if they're serious. So that's what we mean when we say the system is rigged. because it's something like 93% of the time, the person who raises the most money ends up winning in congressional races. So I have, and here's the thing, like, I don't want everybody to be too upset by this, because I have full confidence that all things being equal, the populist left candidates win, because they actually stand for the ideas and policies that the majority of the American people want. And that's not my opinion. That's not conjecture. That's what the numbers show. That's what the opinion polls show. So if you have somebody who's a likable person, they're correct on the issues, and all other things are equal, that person is going to win. But the problem that we're running into is, in these Senate races in particular, there's just such a gap in fundraising that all things are not equal. So we can't, get to the point where we're considered a viable candidate. And here's how you know that my theory is correct on this. When you look at the results, since we started, fighting back at post the 2016 election, and there's a bunch of progressive groups that popped up now, and the grassroots are mobilized and everything. Since we started fighting back, you know where we've had the most success? The smaller the office is. So when you go to the local races and the state races, and the evidence of this is, go look at our revolution and the tremendous success that they've had. Because typically, the smaller the office, the less money it takes in order to win. So the more people power actually matters. So there's been a bigger left-wing wave at the local and state level than there's been in Congress. And by the way, there has been somewhat of a left-wing wave even for the primaries for Congress, for U.S. Congress. But the higher the office, the more it's obvious that it's basically rigged. And there's the money primary you have to get passed before you can be considered viable and before you have a chance to win. So that's why some of the best candidates like Paula Jean Swearengin and Allison Hartson didn't advance and didn't win, because they were running for the higher office, the office of U.S. Senate, and that's where money is paramount and even more important. But when you look at the victories of Our Revolution and many others, Working Families Party, the PCCC, at the local level, they're almost winning all of their races. So that's reason, though, to be optimistic, because, again, I think that shows that all things being equal, our candidates do awesome, and whenever they don't end up doing well, it's not because of the failure of the message, it's because of the failure of the system, and it's because for those bigger races, you just need a hell of a lot more money. So, listen, to me, the takeaway from this is we need to get more involved. We need to double, triple, quadruple our efforts in terms of making phone calls and getting the word out there and letting everybody know who the good guys are. Because, again, I have no doubt that if the name recognition was much wider, and if all things were equal, Allison Hartson would be advancing. But we don't live in that world, and we have to fight to try to get to that world. And it's just, bottom line, guys, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. But this isn't reason to despair, and this isn't reason to say, fuck it, let's all go home. This is reason double, triple, quadruple our efforts in order to succeed. So this is just another election where overall the results are kind of mixed. And like I said from early on, what was it, 40%, 50% of the races run by Our Revolution, Justice Democrats, PCCC, Working Families, and the rest of them. 40 to 50%, that's not bad on our first crack at things, especially given the money difference. So let's keep fighting on and never give up, because I can tell you one thing for sure, the establishment won't give up.